Nothing is more expensive than bad information. Know the source. OneRadioNetwork.com.
Well, a very pleasant good morning to you. This is Patrick Timpone. It is the last day of March 2020, and what a world we are living in. Huh? This is OneRadioNetwork.com. Special show this morning. We sometimes take Tuesday and Thursday off, but lately, not really. There's so much stuff going on to talk about that we have begun to do some more things on Tuesday and Thursday. And we told you that, too. We're going to be adding shows all the time. This morning is no different. You will hear from a very fascinating lady, Isadora Laker, the first Canadian-German new medicine educator. We're going to be talking about this coronavirus thing from a very wide-ranging perspective. We'll talk about how it is from German New Medicine that people actually can express this virus. Does the virus really exist? The testing, the all kinds of aspects that you've been hearing about on One Radio Network and also in a lot of the videos. So stay right there. Just let me plug tomorrow. Two very fascinating people tomorrow. Tom Luongo, who is going to be making his second appearance on the show, and he's really tied into the whole geopolitical financial system. We really liked him, so we invited him back. He's going to be here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. And then Stephen Guinness, who studies big picture kind of things like who are these people that when we say they, when people say, well, they're doing, they're who are they? And Stephen studies this, and so I think you're going to find that quite fascinating. That'll be tomorrow. If you care to join this morning's show, and if you're listening or watching the slideshow and the audio on Facebook and YouTube, you can post comments there on Facebook and questions, and also Patrick at OneRadioNetwork.com. If you have a question or a comment for Isadora Laker, Patrick at OneRadioNetwork.com. If you'd like to use the telephone, I know it doesn't involve your thumbs, but you can try 888-663-6386. As I said, it's Isadora, kind of a different way to say Isadora, first Canadian-German new medicine educator, consultant authorized by Dr. And a consultant that authorized by Dr. Hammer. She resides in Toronto, where she pioneered an introduction of the German new medicine. And this is so fascinating, this whole work. And we're going to ask her about that from the opening up, and then we'll get into COVID-19. Miss Laker, good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to have you here. So, folks, we have new people all the time. Let's not assume they know anything about German new medicine. Why don't you just give us just a short, concise snapshot of what German new medicine is and who was Dr. Hammer and when was he here?
Well, Dr. Hammer discovered this system actually in 1981 as the result of a personal tragedy that he experienced 3 years earlier when his son was shot by the Italian crown prince, of all people. He developed a testicular cancer, and not long after that, his wife developed a breast cancer. She was also a medical doctor. And he opted just for surgery. He personally did not believe in traditional treatment, although he was a traditionally trained medical doctor and practiced in the traditional field. So he had the surgery, he recovered, and 3 years later, as he was trying to get his life back to normal, he got a position at the University of Munich at one of their affiliated oncology clinics. Apparently, this particular clinic specialized in reproductive cancer. So he took this opportunity as a head internist to inquire with his patients, and he had 180 patients in his care at that time, whether or not they had an unanticipated event or a shock in their lives prior to the onset of their cancer. And in every case that he interviewed, the answer was yes.
Wow.
And from there on, he decided to explore how this came about. Because he was an internist, he needed to understand the mechanism. And we were talking about cancers. I mean, this was serious business. So it seemed at that moment when it was confirmed that he actually found the key to why a cancer will develop. But over the years, he found that there were 5 biological laws that actually ruled the disease process. So over the course of the next couple of years, between 81 and 83, Dr. Hamer explored this with his patients, and this is when he discovered the first 3 biological laws, which are immensely important in trying to understand any given disease process outside of poisoning. So when his colleagues actually got wind of what he was doing, they started laughing behind his back, and his superiors terminated his contract. 3 years later, he lost his license to practice medicine because he would not deny his findings. So he had to continue his research on his own, which was relatively difficult in those days because one of the most important tools that he was using was a CAT scan of the brain. Now, during this process of his initial investigation, he discovered that, quite by accident, that a CT will reveal marks on the brain that indicate that there is conflict activity going on. And as he looked into this further, he began to understand that these were specific relays of the brain that were associated with organs. And here we're talking about known neurology.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
As he continued, of course, he literally mapped the entire brain, remapped it to include all of the organs and the tissues of those particular organs. So his work is vast. It's actually mind-boggling and difficult to explain in a nutshell. But if I was going to do that, then I would say he discovered the scientific evidence that supports what we loosely call the mind-body connection.
Yes.
In other words, we have a shock. That shock is experienced by the psyche. The psyche will determine exactly what part of the brain is going to be affected and simultaneously what organ is going to express the disease process at that moment. This is a simultaneous event.
Yes.
It happens in a split second.
Wow. So this is real. Your work and Dr. Hamer's work is real scientific proof for the scientific minds out there that the soul, mind, body connection thing is real. And so do you think after all these years, before we get into COVID, Isadora, that virtually, can you say that like everything, maybe, I don't know, high blood pressure or blood sugar or heart stuff, always, sometimes, or we don't know, always has some kind of a trauma or a sudden event? Does it, or could it be also something that kind of grows over years too, I guess, couldn't it?
Well, no, it doesn't quite work that way in the sense that it builds up.
Okay.
As I was working in this field, I mean, I've been doing this officially with clients since 1996, so I've got a vast amount of experience under my belt.
Mm-hmm.
And about 6 years in, I had a long discussion with Dr. Hamer because I was also making observations with my clients, the same way he was doing it with his clients over the course of 35 years. I, of course, had to follow his rules and in investigating all of this. And I had a conversation that one day and said, you know, I've observed that it's not the first time that someone has one of these biological shocks, which is what he calls this, that the physical body responds. It's the second time. And he says, I agree 100%.
The second time.
And I was astonished because he never, ever explained that or wrote about it or anything like that. So it was inevitable that someone like me that was really just beginning to explore officially in a practice his 5 biological laws, that I would come to the same conclusion. So we really have what is called a programming conflict, where God, if you will, gives us a grace period where we don't actually express anything physically.
Whoa.
But the physical expression occurs on the second time that we experience this conflict.
Isn't that fascinating? In other words, say, how would that work in the case maybe of a traumatic divorce? Yeah, you have to wait till you get divorced again before it shows up.
No, it really depends on all of the criteria.
Right.
That a person experienced during this process. They're usually associated with another event or another kind of breakup. It's just that there are more tracks, if you will, or triggers that are added to these situations. And of course, this is also when most people will develop something when they breathe a sigh of relief and everything is put behind them.
Yeah.
Now, one of the more interesting things, and I have to explain this, because it's very pertinent to today's discussion.
Okay.
And that is that 60% of all known diseases will only occur when the conflict has been resolved.
When it's been resolved, 60%.
Yes, that's a very high number, isn't it?
Yes.
And that includes the flu. So when someone gets the flu, that means they have resolved something very specific with respect to a territorial fear. And in most cases, a territorial fear also involves some form of an aggression or an aggressive act towards them.
So the flu then is the healing process.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Wow. Okay, we'll get back to that. Let's dig into COVID. So on your blogs, you write that you can see and you believe with your research that this was a territory kind of experience for the men and a nesting kind of experience for the women there in Wuhan in the fight or flight, and that's what expressed the virus. Is that right?
Yes, I have to expand on that a little
do.
bit. Now, men are, generally speaking, territorial creatures.
Yes, we are.
Right? Yes. Women were the nesters.
Uh-huh.
But women also experience fears, but most of her fears are with respect to what is going on within her nest. This is her territory.
Yeah.
Whereas the male he's the protector of the nest. So he's really very concerned with what's going on outside of the nest that he needs to be aware of. Right?
Yes.
So, but then again, we also know that in the female aspect, where she has one of these nest fear conflicts, this can even involve abuse by her husband.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So this is a fear within her nest.
Yes.
She can also observe her husband abusing her children, right? Okay. Or her mother being abused by her father.
Yes.
That kind of a thing. So really, these are personal fears that have to do with an aggression of some sort. There is always the fear of an aggression or an aggressive act against someone when we have these territorial fears. So in Wuhan, when I began to explore this, right in the beginning, because I understand Dr. Hamer's work so well, I had to look at what was really going on in Wuhan at the time that everyone became sick. They all became sick over a period of 4 weeks.
Yes.
And according to what Dr. Hamer discovered, there is and we're going to have to put this on hold for a second before I explain it, there is no such thing as a virus. And he's not the only one that says this.
Yes.
But
And we'll get back to that. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
but when we're talking about what was going on collectively in Wuhan, we have to remember there are 11 million residents in that area.
Mm-hmm.
So the numbers of people that got affected is not that astonishing, given the fact that they had all pretty much resolved something around the same time. And that something had to do with their environment. Now, Wuhan is one of the most polluted areas in all of China, world for that matter. Now, they also had 6 incinerator plants in Wuhan that people were very, very fearful of. And this caused a great deal of air pollution. If you took a picture of Wuhan today, you would see nothing but dark clouds. You can't even see the sun, it's that polluted.
Wow.
So the population, or some representatives of their population, actually made appointments in Beijing with government officials to discuss what was going on in that area. Now, this handful of people, they were met by a few representatives, but were escorted into cars and immediately driven right back to Wuhan without any discussion. Then, in the end of June of 2019, they had mass protests in that area also regarding the pollution in that district. Of course, people are afraid because of what they're breathing in. Now, these incinerator plants, it's a wasteland that surrounds them. And people were very, very concerned for their health. And a lot of people already had existing respiratory issues like asthma or even emphysema. And the amount of air pollution that they were subject to is detrimental to their existing condition. So needless to say, they tried, but they failed. However, it was around mid-December when the media went into one of these areas where there was an incinerator plant, and they found that it had actually been shut down. So there was hope for the residents of this region that the government was beginning to take them seriously. Mm-hmm. And as I understand it, there has been a dialogue established now to make changes in that particular area. But this coincided very quickly with the closing of this plant, or the discovery that the plant had been closed mid-December, which is actually when the first cases began to emerge. Now, in the GNM, once we resolve one of these territorial fear conflicts, the physical reaction happens in less than 48 hours. This is when we will begin to get our flu symptoms.
When we begin to heal, or when we have resolved some kind of a conflict.
Yes, exactly.
So the body was doing something during the conflict that now has to be repaired?
Absolutely.
Explain
so
that.
So what happens is that there are ulcerations that occur in the lining of the bronchi. And these symptoms go unnoticed, but generally speaking, we are very fearful and we lose sleep. We may have cold hands. Our blood pressure might even go up during that stress period. And unfortunately, as soon as we resolve this conflict, the repair phase actually kicks in, and the ulcerations will begin to repair. But along with that, because of the way that it's wired to the brain, this is when we will get the tickle and the need to cough.
Huh. When it's repairing.
Yes, exactly.
Wow. So what physiologically, Elzador, what is the body doing with these ulcerations in the bronchial tubes? It's do we know? Can you explain what it's doing? Just repairing the ulcerations,
during the conflict phase.
I'm sorry.
Dr. Hammer discovered that every everything that we experience has a biological meaning behind it.
Yes.
Now, when we develop these ulcerations in any of the tubes of our body, it may be, for example, the bile ducts.
Mm-hmm.
They're all covered by the same kind of tissue, and they all react the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have these ulcerations, their biological meaning is, actually to enlarge these tubes so that we can take in more air during the conflict active phase.
Oh, well, that makes sense, right? We need more oxygen to breathe more to protect ourselves from the aggression.
Exactly. But it also helps us to react faster in a fight or flight moment.
How so?
Yes. Well, when we have more oxygen in our systems, and of course all of our muscles are fed, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Not to mention, of course, that when we actually break down the flu symptoms or the traditional flu symptoms, where we're looking at these respiratory issues, we're talking lower respiratory right now. We also have muscle aches and pains, and those muscle aches and pains usually occur from the lumbar area right down to our legs.
Yeah.
This is because at that moment we were in fight or flight. So all of our muscles reacted at the same time. The fever that we experience really has nothing to do with any kind of an infection, which this is not. The fever has to do with the fact that the relays are wired in the sensory part of the brain, and it is that particular part of the brain that will give us a fever under these circumstances. So there is no microbe whatsoever that is wreaking havoc physically.
Why does the body create fever? What's the purpose of that?
Well, it really depends on the nature of the conflict. Now, the fever really has to do with part of the inflammatory process that is going on during this repair phase, because the repair occurs along with inflammation. So when we are looking at these inflammatory processes in this particular kind of cellular structure, which occurs all over our body, then this is really what we're picking up when we do any kind of testing. We're not picking up a virus. We are picking up lymphocytes. We're picking up the results of this repair phase.
The immune system working.
Yes, and the inflammatory process.
And the cough
this is the difference
the cough. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And this is the difference between what we would call a true microbial infection, which is caused by a bacteria, such as tuberculosis, for example.
Right. So you're arguing that the Wuhan people were resolve some kind of a conflict, so they manifest some of what they thought was a virus, right? Mm-hmm. And then what would happen to them if they start reading or hearing from a lot of people getting sick and they don't understand this? Does that stop the healing process or make it worse or extend it?
No, the healing process, once you are in, has to run its course. And usually these situations run their course, depending on the severity of the reaction of the individual. They run their course within 4 weeks.
3 to 4 weeks, a kind of like a common flu thing, right? 3 to 4 weeks.
Exactly, yeah. Well, it really is a common flu.
Yeah.
It's just that the numbers had been misinterpreted.
But is there anything, in your opinion, any microbe or something that people were giving to each other in Wuhan?
No, it doesn't actually work that way.
Really? All of this. Wait a minute. So all of this lockdowns
from person to person.
so all of this lockdown stuff, in your opinion, is just a waste of time.
Absolutely.
Wow. Boy, if you're right.
Well, I am right.
Okay, all right, I get you. I
think history proves that.
It sounds like
Let's look at it from our personal experience.
No, I understand. We need to take a little quick break, okay?
Sure.
You stay right there. So what do you think? I told you this was going to be curious and fun. Ilsador Laker is her name, and you could read about Dr. Hammer and some of this work. And if you're interested in the whole soul-mind-body connection and how this works, as more and more people have been talking about it for the last 20, 30 years. Back in our hippie days, we were talking about, well, the soul, mind, and body are all connected. 40 years ago. This is right up your alley. Her website is gnmonlineseminars.com. GNM, that's for German New Medicine Seminars, online seminars.com. Pretty fascinating. Stay right there. We got a couple little profit centers here we need to do. We're talking with Brandon Amalani, and he is the man who brings us the Blue Shield technology to keep us all those little EMFs from doing harm to our body. Mr. Brandon, the Blue Shield is a really beautiful little cube, right? That's the main product. And how does this work?
Well, the cube essentially sends out signals into the environment that entrain the body. So the body is affected by all these electromagnetic fields in the environment. And when Blue Shield's introduced into the environment, the body starts sympathetically resonating with it. And what we found over 30 years of development is that the body prefers the algorithm, the frequency range, the randomization of frequencies that are exposed into the environment, and the body stops attacking EMF or perceiving the EMF as a threat. And what this does is it normalizes white blood cell count, and it also starts to reduce inflammation markers from the body trying to attack the EMF. Wow. So essentially what's happening is the body is basically renormalizing and reallocating immune power to the body, and it makes the body stronger and more well-regulated.
Good job, Brandon. That's an excellent explanation of how this technology works. It's called the Cube, the Blue Shield. See the ad on the front page. Use promo code ONERADIO for a 10% discount. Get yourself one, take care of the whole house. That's Blue Shield right on the front page of OneRadioNetwork.com. And they also have a little personal guy. I have one right here in my pocket, even though I have a cube downstairs. I'm in the studio, and there's a lot of things flying through the air around here. I've got the meters to show. And so this is a little credit card size, and it's the Blue Shield Personal. You can get one of these, and I just grab these, put in my pocket when I'm driving in the city where they have these cell phone towers. And it really does work. There's they've worked with it on chickens and their mortality and their egg laying capabilities, and there's it works. Blue Shield on our website, OneRadioNetwork.com. So I think we should do a little sweating here, and then we're going to be back with Ilsador Laker. Previously with cardiologist Dr. Joel Kahn, 35 years experience in cardiology.
On your commercial break, you hit a hot button because I'm a giant fan of infrared sauna and the cardiac benefits.
Tell us about why you like these saunas for the heart. What does it do?
In Japan, it's a traditional therapy of heart disease to even sick heart patients to sit for 15 or 20 minutes in an infrared sauna, then lie down and rest and hydrate for about half an hour. They call it WAON, W-A-O-N. It means soothing heat. And they've done research studies, like 30 of them in humans. Anti-ages your arteries and improves the strength of your heart, and it may actually prolong survival in sick heart patients. Anybody can just, again, go to the internet, read about infrared sauna heart disease, or put my name there because I've written many articles about it. Now there's data coming out of Sweden and Finland because they've published some amazing data, the number of times a week you're in a sauna, number of minutes each time. You can just track out how long you're going to live. So very powerful therapy by being in, my favorite is an infrared sauna.
Well, I don't know about you, but if the heart muscles and the arteries are happy, things are good. Very important. We promote the Relax Far Infrared Sauna, and we really think this is one of the best ones in the world, and I'm not exaggerating. I've used this sauna for over 10 years now. I know Phil Wilson, who brings them in. They're created in a lab in or a medical university in Taiwan. They've won several awards. They're portable. If you're watching on video on YouTube and Facebook and on our website, you can see the picture of them, and they're very comfortable. I use it virtually every day of my life. Not that that matters to you, but you really, really feel good afterwards. You sweat, It helps with the parasympathetic to get you out of that fight or flight thing, helps the body to chill a little bit. I've had some really interesting spiritual experiences sitting in there. Well, I've been able to actually see what Isildur is talking about, how some of the things in the body and some of the images and the thoughts and how this all works simply by, relaxing into God, if you will, in the sauna. Pretty cool stuff. Just email me and we'll hook you up for $1,150. $1,150 in the lower 48. We also ship them all over the world. Up where Isildur lives in Canada. I think it's only about $100 extra in Canada, about $125 or $200 extra in Europe. The only place in Europe we don't ship them is Germany, and you'll just have to write Angela Merkel a letter and ask her what that's about. I don't know why. Anyway, just email me and we'll hook you up no matter where you live with the proper plug. Patrick at OneRadioNetwork.com. Patrick at OneRadioNetwork.com.
We are listener supported. One Radio Network.
German New Medicine, the work of Isildur Laker, and following up on the work of Dr. Hammer. How long were you able to work with Dr. Hammer while he was here, Isildur?
Well, I had actually been introduced to the new medicine, as it was called then, in 1992. Mm-hmm. And I studied with a protege of his, also a medical doctor, a Belgian medical doctor, until 1998, when he introduced me to Dr. Hammer. So between 1998 and 2017, when he passed, I was his protege.
Mm-hmm. Now, we know or believe that so many of the deaths allegedly from COVID-19 are people with pneumonia and all kinds of things that the medical teams have been told to put down corona. That's really, a lot of people are saying that. Do you think that's true?
Oh, I agree 100%. I'm German by origin, and I still speak and understand German. So I had the opportunity to listen to some of these German doctors voice their opinions over the last couple of weeks. And, the numbers just didn't add up to a lot of these people. And they started to make comments with respect to the way they were tallying up the mortality rate. And it seems that in Italy, more than anywhere else, if someone had tested positive with corona and they happened to die, regardless of what the cause of death was, even if they fell down the stairs and died, and they were diagnosed with being positive with corona, then they were chalked up as being a corona victim.
I see. And we'll talk about the testing before we leave here, and that's very interesting too. Let's get back to the body, or to the body and how this works. Walk us through, from a German New Medicine perspective, of just pneumonia. I think that's fascinating that you write about.
Yes, pneumonia, and I had this a few years ago myself, and luckily I understood what caused it, and I was able to recover from it in 3 weeks. This is the trick, really, when you understand the GNM, and you can understand what that moment in time was that you had that biological shock that put you into this kind of healing phase. You can cut down the healing phase dramatically. Now, where pneumonia is concerned, we are looking at a territorial fear. So some kind of a fear that had to do with an aggression. We have the ulcerations building in the bronchi. Because we're in a fight or flight, our muscles are also affected. And when we go into a healing phase, then of course we develop the fever, because this is essentially an inflammatory process. Now, once we're afflicted with this, and we are in this inflammatory healing phase, there has to be something else going on in way of conflict activity that would actually develop into pneumonia. And here we're talking about a specific conflict that has to do with the renal collecting tubules. So the renal collecting tubules respond to a conflict that has to do with our survival. So if our survival is threatened in any way, shape, or form, then the kidneys will go into a situation where they will hold back water or fluid. The best explanation that I can give you would be, let's say you were driving through a desert and all of a sudden your car breaks down and you forgot your water at the hotel, right? Immediately, if this isn't a road that's well traveled, immediately you go into this survival mode. You will develop a dry mouth and your body will begin to retain all the fluid in order to prolong your survival. Okay, now, when we are in this survival mode and we are simultaneously in one of these healing phases, what happens is all of the cells that are undergoing this inflammatory process will become engorged with more fluid. They're already engorged with a certain amount of fluid as a result of the inflammation, but they will become engorged with more fluid during this healing phase. So it is actually a complicating factor in all healing phases when you are in this kind of a survival mode.
And so then the people, Isildur, in the assisted living and the nursing homes that develop pneumonia, how could all these have these different conflicts going on? I'm just kind of confused with that.
We're talking about, humanity.
Yeah.
No one is immune from conflicts. I think the kidney collecting tubule conflict is rampant in our society, and especially in seniors, because we are talking about a threat to our existence. And here, Dr. Hamer has fine-tuned it to 4 different kinds of existence conflict. We're looking at perhaps a threat to our existence as the result of a diagnosis.
Oh, okay.
Okay, or an illness, a serious illness.
You have cancer, or you have this.
Exactly.
Right.
Or you have HIV.
Wow. Yeah.
There is also the possibility that you have been removed from your home, which a lot of seniors are.
Oh. Yeah.
We're talking about a refugee conflict. You're away from your group. You are isolated.
Yes.
You feel abandoned. So right there we have 4 possibilities just for someone who has been put into a nursing home. They're at the end of their lives. They are debilitated. They need help. They're isolated. They're no longer in their home, and their family hardly comes to visit them.
Yes.
So,
yeah, I understand. And then they're being taken care of by people well-meaning people, God love them, but are being paid $8 to $10 an hour, and it's tough. It's keeping up with these people. We've all been there.
Overworked and underpaid.
Yeah, we've all been there, and we've seen. Overworked and underpaid, I think, is a fair analysis. Isildur Laker is here if you care to join us. What do you think about this? 888-663-6386. Email patrick@oneradionetwork.com. So, wow. Okay, so let's say we're in Wuhan and this stuff's all going on in December. And so walk us through how could all spread around the world?
Well, it doesn't actually spread.
It doesn't. I know it doesn't, but
everyone has.
How does it do it?
Conflicts, right?
Okay, so.
And here we're actually talking about a universal phenomenon that occurs pretty much the same time of the year, anytime between November and March. This is what we call the flu season, just out of observation.
Yes.
So there's nothing abnormal about that. And when I actually started to crunch the numbers, and I wasn't the only one that was starting to do that because it just didn't add up. Let's take the U.S., for example. In this particular pandemic, there have been 160,000 reported cases with 3,000 deaths. That sounds pretty high, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
In New York alone, there were 66,500 reported cases with 1,200 deaths. Now, we have to look at previous years to get the real perspective as to what is going on. So let's take 2011 over 2012. The mortality rate was at 12,000 people.
Where? In New York?
No, in the States.
I'm sorry. In the United States?
Yes. This is from the CDC.
Okay.
This is
2,000.
from their website.
12,000.
12,000 people.
Okay.
2012 over 13, it was 56,000 deaths.
All right.
Okay. 2017 over 2018, there were 710,000 reported cases of influenza with a mortality rate of 10%. That's an astounding 70,000 people that died or reportedly died of flu symptoms 2 years ago. And 56% of those people were hospitalized, and they were over the age of 65. Mm-hmm. So what's wrong with today's picture? We're looking at 3,000 deaths? Good heavens, that's the lowest rate ever.
Well, yeah, that doesn't make sense, though. I mean, if the whole fear thing in the conflict is accurate, and I suspect it is, wouldn't there be just a whole lot more people expressing this whole phenomenon you've explained so clearly with all the fear going on in the media? So that doesn't even make sense, does it?
Exactly. But I'm saying that there are 160,000 reported cases. These are people that were tested.
Right. Well, that's a good spot. We need to get into the testing thing. So, but that, what's your take on? Can you really take a test and you can see if you've got some kind of virus that you didn't have a week ago?
Not at all.
Okay.
First off, I think I need to give you a little bit of history on this because as Dr. Hamer was doing his research, he also began to look at the tissues that could possibly give us what we call a virus infection. Mm-hmm. For example, hepatitis, very common, or the common flu virus. He met Dr. Stefan Lanka, I think it was in around 2000, because we started entering into discussions about the possibility of viruses not existing around that time with Dr. Hamer.
Yes.
And Dr. Lanka was actually the only virologist and biologist to ever discover a virus underneath a microscope. And this goes back to 1993. Now, here, it had nothing to do with a mammal or a human. This particular virus that he managed to isolate was attached to a sea algae.
A sea algae?
And that happened, yes, it's in a plant life, right?
Uh-huh.
So he found that this was not a destructive process, that in fact, this was a symbiotic process where there was a healthy exchange between the sea algae and this virus that he discovered. After he discovered this, he began to question the entire virus theory, and in particular, in those days where HIV was supposed to have been a virus, he began to look into that more seriously, and he discovered that they had labeled something as a virus that had admittedly, by traditional medicine, never been isolated underneath a microscope. And that's when he began to look at this entire process, this so-called scientific process of isolating something. And he found that this was a highly complex process in comparison to looking at something underneath a microscope. And it developed the extraction of this, that, and the other, and then looking at what was left, which were really particles that were made up of proteins and fats. And this is what they're using today and saying that these are isolated viruses. Now, Dr. Lanka has made a vast impact on microbiology and virology because now traditional medicine is starting to admit that they're just seeing particles.
Not a virus, particles.
Particles without a nucleus.
Particles
In other
from
words,
the.
they're not even live constituents. These are dead byproducts.
And where'd they come from? Where do they come from?
The inflammatory process.
Whoa. Okay. All right. Yeah.
So the testing these days, well, you know what really alerted me to the possibility that this was orchestrated was when it was said that the FDA supplied China with these COVID-19 testing kits within days of them declaring there was an epidemic.
Back in December or January?
January.
Really?
Yes. They had them ready and available. They shipped them to Wuhan.
Good for them.
Oh, wonderful. But what's wrong with this picture? If they haven't isolated anything and they hadn't even labeled anything, what were they testing? What were they looking for?
Proteins and fats or something.
Well, over a period of time, the Chinese also discovered that these tests were highly unreliable. They would get false positives and false negatives, and then they'd retest a person, and then they'd get a false negative, and then a false positive. It was insanity. So they turned to another tool to determine if there was pneumonia in the individual. So what they did was they took chest x-rays and or CAT scans of the chest. And if there was fluid there, then they would say, well, they have pneumonia, there's fluid in the lungs, it's suspected that they have this virus, therefore we must isolate them, etc., etc.
I see.
Now, the only problem with that is that there are other conditions that will give a person fluid in the lungs. For example, even a bacterial pneumonia, which is a different kind of conflict altogether, or heart failure. So when they started to implement the use of CTs and X-rays in their diagnostic tools, the numbers of affected people doubled literally overnight.
Why is it then that so many people, I don't know what percentage it is, do you have any idea, are testing theoretically or allegedly testing positive for this COVID in this country today?
Well, that I don't know.
Yeah.
But I have to say, you know, the report I got from Germany a couple of days ago was that in Berlin particularly, if there were 200 people lined up to go for the testing, the doctor, of course, would have to see them and examine them first before he would allow any of them to be tested. Now, because they already understood how unreliable this testing was. So out of 200 people, perhaps only 50 would be given the swab test. So they already knew that there was something wrong here, that the testing was unreliable, not to mention the fact that this was a testing that was geared to something that they had not even isolated as yet.
Wow. You start looking geopolitically and thinking about the forces behind it and who caused all this. That's an interesting conversation. We may have a little bit of that today while we're here with Isadora Laker. But let's continue on the body part of it, which to me is just fascinating. So maybe if I give you this quick little story, maybe you could help explain this, because I think it might be helpful to people. 3 or 4 years ago, very good friends of mine, some of my best friends, a man and a woman couple, and I went to a wedding in Dripping Springs, Texas, where I live. 3 or 4 or 5 days later, all 3 of us came down, with the worst gunky flu. Man, it was horrid. I mean, really hardcore 3 to 4 weeks of really terrible stuff. Now, how does something like that happen in a trio of friends where we, the conjecture is, well, I must have got something and I gave it to you, or you got something and you gave it to me. How does that work?
Well, that would be the normal assumption, wouldn't it?
Of course.
But I think if we began to look at the individual and what was going on at their lives or in their lives at that particular time, what was resolved, then we could pretty much determine exactly what the cause was. Now, we also need to look at our own observations. Let's say there's a flu epidemic going around, or regular flu season, and one member of the family gets sick, but nobody else does. How do you explain that?
Yes.
Right? It's the same thing. Or 3 or 4 people in a family of 6 develop the flu, and 2 don't. How do we explain that?
So you're suggesting that with the little story I just said with my best friends, we all resolved something and we kind of did it together because we had this common, I don't know, friends' state of consciousness or experiences together?
Yes. Going back to Wuhan, the reports, I think 4 weeks in, were that they were astonished that there were no children affected by this virus.
Yes. Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, how do we explain that? Right. I think it has to do with the fact that children are protected by their parents from all of these external threats that they were experiencing on a daily basis.
Oh, so they rely on mom and dad and grandma and grandpa to protect them so they don't go through the whole experience.
Well, they're not the ones that are experiencing the aggression, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're protected from that, even if it's something that is happening in their society. If the parents don't address it with the children, they don't pass along that fear.
And then how do we explain the reports? Again, we don't know. Many people are saying they're just not true, of hospitals being full and they're running out of beds and the morgues are full and all of that. I mean, that's just media stuff, so you don't know.
Exactly.
You don't know, really.
Exactly. It's completely blown out of proportion, if you ask me.
Well, there's certainly reports of that. I've seen people going into German hospitals and there's nothing strange going on. And
exactly. The wards are empty.
Yeah. Here's an email from Megan. I don't think Patrick may realize that the conflict potentiality presently being experienced in this whole coronavirus saga have not had a resolution as yet. When the resolution is experienced due to notification that the contagion is past, the symptoms will present en masse due to the healing process. I kind of lost him there. Let's see, did I read that right? Do you understand what they're saying?
Yes, I think what she's saying is that because of all of the fear-mongering, that a lot of the population, if they buy into this, are going to be subject to a flu down the line when everything is behind us. And this is what I've been saying all along, that, the second wave, so to speak, of this pandemic will occur when our lives go back to normal and we breathe a sigh of relief. Now, if we compare that to what was going on in Wuhan initially, it's exactly the same thing. People were afraid, literally, of breathing the air. That's what we're doing right now.
Yes.
We're doing social distancing when we go shopping. I see people holding their breaths as they pass me in a grocery store.
Yeah. So would there be a delay in that of experiencing these symptoms because of fear and all of that? Would there be a delay, like even a month or 2 months?
I wouldn't say it was a delay. I would say that once these people would resolve this on their own, they would experience these kinds of symptoms. They would have a flu.
So So once again, I keep forgetting that it's the symptoms are the resolution.
Yes.
So then maybe a month later they might say, that whole thing, I don't, maybe that wasn't right, and I'm not afraid. Or then they'll get sick.
Exactly.
Well, that's what really confuses people. Then they'll say, well, I guess I was wrong about that.
Fair.
It's interesting how the healing phase is the part, because we've had people on the show who've done some recall healing work suggest that like heart attacks and these kind of things are actually happening when the person is healing.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Yes. It's only at the healing crisis, or what we call the epileptoid or epileptic crisis, that a heart attack will occur.
Because the conflict has resolved in the man or woman, and then what's going on?
Well, there are two kinds of heart attacks. We're actually looking at two different parts of the heart. The myocardium is one area, and here we will, when we resolve this conflict within 48 hours, we will have a heart attack.
Oh, good.
Known as a myocardial infarct.
Infarction.
And here we're looking at an overwhelming stress with respect to a relationship. Then the other one would be called a coronary infarct, which has to do with a territorial loss conflict. And in this case, when someone has a coronary, so to speak, it's commonly believed that a blockage in the arteries is responsible for the heart stopping. But what's interesting is that Dr. Hamer actually made his discovery in how instrumental the brain was in this entire biological process through a patient that came in to emerge with an apparent heart attack. He was unconscious when he arrived, and protocol is to take a CT of the brain to confirm the cause of the loss of consciousness. So they took a CT of the brain, and this is when Dr. Hamer saw a pocket of fluid, which we call edema, directly on the relay that is responsible for the heart rhythm center. That's when the penny dropped, and he realized that the brain was actually the organ that mediated between the psyche and the physical organ.
Wow. Fascinating, eh? Ilse-Dora Laker is with us, German New Medicine. So there are some that have been conjecturing, Ilse-Dora, that the 5G and all the electromagnetic things going on in Wuhan was a contributory factor. Can you comment or have an opinion about that?
Well, I do have an opinion about that. And I believe that it is a definite possibility that these electromagnetic waves or EMFs that we are constantly being subjected to is a contributing factor in the sense that it will exasperate a condition.
Exasperate, yeah.
It isn't responsible for it, but it exasperates it.
So are you suggesting that the fear of 5G or the uncertainty about it or whatever would allow it to hurt us?
Well, no. I think if not the way you have put it.
Okay.
In the GNM explanation, we know that the fear is ultimately responsible for the healing phase that will give us the flu. But from the scientific perspective, and I had a conversation with Dr. Hamer some 20 years ago about this, where it was observed because the cell phones were being used more and more. It was observed, I think it was in 2002, that a lot of women were developing ovarian cysts or polycystic ovaries. And it was, and this was in Italy, by the way, and they believed that the cause had to do with cell phones, which are capable of sending and receiving microwaves.
Yes.
So a lot of women were carrying them in their handbags or even in their pockets. Men were carrying in their pockets, and there did seem to be an increase in infertility in men. So they did studies, and they hypothesized at that time that the microwaves were responsible for creating this manifestation. Now, we have to understand that the ovaries are the kind of organ that during the conflict active phase, there will be a tissue loss or necrosis. So this is also something that a microwave is capable of doing. A microwave is capable of cell destruction. So as soon as the microwave exposure stops, the same healing mechanism will kick in as if you resolve the conflict. So that means that, in fact, that when the body is no longer exposed to these external elements or triggers, then it will have the opportunity to heal. So that means that the healing phase, and we already knew this in the GNM, the healing phase of the ovary has to do with the building of an ovarian cyst.
The healing phase?
Yes.
Wow.
Cysts will only appear when the conflict has been resolved. So essentially what is happening is that these microwaves are mimicking the conflict active phase.
They're mimicking the idea that the party's over and you're healing.
Exactly. Well, yes, yes. That, well, in the case of the ovaries, we're looking at a loss conflict, a profound loss, someone that you lost from your life permanently. And that's when the ovaries will begin to degenerate. When you come to terms with that loss, this is when the ovaries will heal, and this is when an ovarian cyst will begin to build. But, and when I addressed this with Dr. Hamer, he said he agreed. And we have the same phenomenon also with radiation. Radiation has the power to destroy cells. And when the body recovers, then someone could develop a thyroid, a papillary thyroid carcinoma, or a leukemia, which is also a recovery phase.
Not when it's going on, but when they're recovering.
Exactly. So during the exposure, this is when we are in the equivalent to a conflict active phase. But when we are no longer exposed to this, we go into the recovery or the healing phase on the organic level.
So would that make sense then when we, quote unquote, get the flu, which we don't, then to rest and relax and fluids and take it easy and allow the healing to happen, and maybe if you like vitamin C or whatever, to support the healing process?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense,
my background is in natural medicine, and that's what we used to suggest to our patients.
Sure, yeah. Yeah. But the vitamin C or other external forces are not really, what are they doing then?
Well, I think they, like you said, they help to support the system.
Okay.
But, when we look at it from the GNM perspective, they all have a property. So when we have a healing phase, we are in a parasympathetic state. So that means that we are, according to the GNM terminology, in a vagatonia, which is a parasympathetic state. Now, when we are in the conflict active phase, we are in a sympathetic stress.
Yes.
That means
Fight
that
or
the
flight.
sympathetic nervous system is affected. Now, all of our remedies have one of those properties. They are either sympathicotonic, which is equal to the sympathetic nervous system and the stress phase, or they are vagatonic, which is equal to the parasympathetic nervous system. So we can offset our symptoms if we take something that has the opposite property. For example, coffee is a stimulant, right?
Yes.
So if we feel tired, normally it's because we are in a parasympathetic state. So we have a cup of coffee, which is a stimulant, that offsets our symptoms, and we feel a little bit more normal. And it's the same with remedies. Echinacea, for example, is a stimulant. So is vitamin C.
Yeah. So I wonder, big picture, I've got so many questions here. Thanks for staying. Can you stick around for a few more minutes?
Absolutely.
Oh, well, this is fun. So big picture, in your opinion, do we always have to get back to the conflict and the spiritual, emotional component to really totally heal, even if we take all the greatest stuff in the world?
I think in my experience, that is the case.
Well, feels like it, doesn't it?
It's the most efficient way.
Yeah. So the things that we have, the tools, they help.
Absolutely.
But unless
it'll make us more comfortable.
Yeah, it makes us healthy. I mean, we feel better, right? We feel better.
We all want to be comfortable. I mean,
sure.
I'll do it.
Sure.
I don't have a problem with it.
I
need to function.
Before we go to a break, I want to. So, do you think that there are? Now we're going to talk about viruses before we go because it's fascinating to me. Are we going to do? I mean, are there bacteria that are something that you can see in a microscope that actually you can catch from somebody else by kissing, or a shopping cart that is different from a virus and not made in the body?
No. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I'm just asking, what do you think?
Well, of all of the bacteria in our bodies, only 2% of them can actually reproduce outside of their environment.
Only 2% can reproduce. Like if you...
Only 3%.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so if you...
The only ones that really can be transmitted person to person are bacteria that have been harvested from cadavers or dead bodies.
Ew.
So here, well, a cadaver, it's not a nice word, but we're looking at meat, for example. Chicken bacteria. That's why, we shouldn't touch chicken to our kitchen counter and then just wipe it off with an ordinary sponge and then wash the dishes with it, because you're going to be transmitting these cadaver toxins. And this is why we have food poisoning.
I see. So that's real, because they manifest outside the body.
But it was discovered very early on by Robert Koch that it was only cadaver toxins that could cross-infect live creatures and be responsible for killing them.
Only cadaver toxins, meaning E. coli meats and stuff like that?
Yes, these are toxins that actually develop or that are naturally occurring in our gut.
Yes.
They need oxygen to survive. So when a creature dies, they will die off to a large extent. However, some of them will be able to survive if they transmute into another form. And that means that they will transmute into a highly toxic form in order to survive.
Oh.
Now, if that particular toxin is taken and given to a live creature, then that creature can die as a result of that particular toxin.
Yes. So that's why the argument is for animals, wolves, and even dogs who have a strong gut with a lot of acid and a lot of bacteria, they can eat rotting meat, and they do fine.
Yes.
It doesn't bother them. We don't mostly often have, unless we live in the jungle and have those kind of bacteria that can deal with the outside invaders.
Exactly. Exactly.
Dr. Isadora Laker is here. We have more emails for her. And so next we're going to get into viruses, Louis Pasteur, pasteurization. Do they exist? HIV, polio. I mean, I got a polio shot when I was a kid. I mean, what was that about? This is from a previous show with Dr. Mark Sircus.
So 3 months ago, a study that was published in Dove Press, brain metastasis completely disappear in non-small cell lung cancer using hydrogen gas inhalation. A case study done in China, a 44-year-old woman diagnosed with multiple metastases.
What's a metastasis?
I mean, it's spread.
It's spreading.
It's not just one tumor. She has multiple tumors.
Uh-huh.
The kind of case where there's no hope, doctors give up hope, complete remission using hydrogen gas.
Really?
In terms of brain cancer, and of course in my hydrogen book, which people can download from my site, quite a bit of information about using hydrogen for cancer and the many reasons and studies that lead up to that. But this study that I'm talking about today, it's like taking a 2x4 and smashing it over the sign of modern oncology. Like, wake up, boys. Here's something simple, something you should be doing anyway, that happens to help people with the worst forms of cancer, almost doomed to die.
If these studies on breathing hydrogen gas in cancer cells are accurate, imagine the possibilities of what this technology can do for you and I when we breathe it and drink the water. Peer-reviewed studies have shown it's the best antioxidant known to man. What exactly is it doing? I have no idea. We have the AquaCure Brown's gas hydrogen machine. We think the best one out there, created by George Wiseman. On our website, you can get a 10% discount, promo code ONERADIO, 1 year, no questions asked, money back guarantee, lifetime warranty, 10% discount. Click and order if you want one on OneRadioNetwork.com. Yeah, boy, they're really fun. I'm enjoying mine, and I think you'll enjoy it. And I think a great investment. You can email George if you'd like to get more information, and just Google molecular hydrogen and what they're helping people to repair from strokes and all kinds of things. And also you can check into the difference between Brown's gas and just pure hydrogen. Ours is a Brown's gas machine, and there's some extra added attractions there with the way they work with the water. When we talk about bacteria and stuff like that, probiotics, and it's just a huge thing. They're all over the place. Many of the probiotics, we were told by Wayne Blakely, in the little capsules, they're not a lot going on, God love them, because they've got to centrifuge them and dry them and do all kinds of stuff. Wayne developed these Living Streams probiotics. You'll see a little picture here for his child who developed autistic symptoms or displayed autistic behavior about 20 years ago, and quite a researcher, and he just couldn't get any answers, and he really started looking at it, and he found his way to the gut, as many people are suggesting with autism and the whole GAPS diet thing in the gut and parasites and stuff. And so he developed these Living Streams probiotics. You can find them on our website, in our store. We think they're some of the best. They're all liquid. You can squirt them in water when you have a meal. We like to just, so I suggest maybe try the multi-blend. The multi-blend and the minerals as the first two. I think that'd be a good way to start. And then they also have Bifido. Put them in your water. You can put them in your dog's water. I think your little tummy and your colon, everybody, just going to get along a little bit easier. With Living Streams probiotics, you can click and order in our store, or just click on the ad on the front page of OneRadioNetwork.com and try a few of them and let us know how you do.
Know the source. One Radio Network.
We're talking with Ilse-Dora Laker. It is German New Medicine. Her website, the main one, is gnmonlineseminars.com. Do you work with people, before we get back in, with individually, or do you give seminars? And what's your life like, Ilse-Dora?
Well, I do both, actually.
You do both?
I have a very busy private practice, and I have been teaching until more recently, when I decided to take a break to expand all my courses. So there's so much information out there that needs to be out there, because people are becoming more aware of Dr. Hamer's work, and they really want to learn this at an official level, and that's what I'm trying to achieve now with my upcoming webinars.
Okay, and they can folks, our listeners can look at this website, gnmonlineseminars.com, for the webinar information?
Yes,
Cool.
and right now we have a special during this pandemic. All of my courses are on for half price, and you have access to the recordings for a full year.
Oh, that's great. So you don't have to go at a specific time.
No, not at all. You can watch them at your leisure, and we're looking at under $500 Canadian, which, according to today's currency exchange, is probably around 350 US.
Wow, what an education, huh, for folks to understand. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Your life will never be the same when it comes to doctors and diseases.
For sure.
Never be the same. On one of your latest blogs, you wrote about Louis Pasteur.
Yes.
And then from that we got pasteurization.
Right.
Talk a bit about him. And is it true that he, at some point before he died, he figured out everything he was doing was not right with this whole germ theory?
He actually had his personal diary that was parallel to his primary lab books. He bequeathed, of course, everything to his family members, and they became very, very wealthy as a result of his research. It goes without saying. And he also requested that none of these records must ever be publicized. And of course, they observed that request for several decades until 1993, when one of the last male ancestors of Pasteur gave the records to Princeton University. And a professor, Gerard Geisen, published an analysis in English that revealed that Pasteur had committed massive fraud in all his studies. For example, vaccinated animals, if they survived, had not been subjected to the experimental cadaver toxins, and there's that word again. But the control group animals that died without vaccines died exactly of that kind of poisoning. So he actually admitted to falsifying his findings in his personal diary. But that left us with the problem that the entire worldview on pathogens is based on this fraud. And that's why vaccines are promoted.
Okay, let's go over that again so we really understand the cadaver and the animals and the vaccines. Walk us through that.
Well, the way the experiments are conducted is that they take the toxins from these cadavers, they inject them into a live creature, and then they wait for the reaction. So if the creature dies, then it is said that they have been cross-infected, and this is as the result of the bacterias. Now, they tried to do that with other bacterias, and this goes back to the research of Robert Koch, and he was highly unsuccessful. So the only toxins that actually killed the host were these cadaver toxins. Now, they took bacteria from other sources and tried to cross-infect creatures, but they weren't successful. Even with the cadaver toxins, if they took these toxins from the creature that had just died and injected it into another live host, the host would just become sick.
But not die.
Right.
So where does that put us with all these things that give animals parvo and rabies and all that?
Well, that's just it. We don't know. Are they in fact external toxins? Excuse me, or are they the same as a poison? You know, Dr. Hammer said, all diseases outside of poisoning are as the result of a biological shock. Then, of course, we also need to look at the methodology that is used when they're doing animal testing. They when they did initial tests on formaldehyde, for example, they injected formaldehyde into the sinuses of these mice or these lab rats. And most of them developed cancers of the sinuses. Of course, the sinuses have to do with the stinking conflict. So they're injecting something that stinks terribly directly into the sinuses of these poor creatures. So it's more along the lines of the methodology that is responsible for the reaction rather than cross-infecting someone or something.
So Pasteur's idea that, how is it then that the WHO and the CDC and everybody else, they're all into the germ theory, right?
Right.
Totally.
Completely.
And
it would give them their power. It gives them their reason for existing.
Oh, because they have a remedy, right? Whatever.
Wow, whatever.
They have something.
The remedy, of course, is vaccinations.
Yeah, vaccinations. So that takes us to, of course, measles, mumps, and all these things that are going on.
Exactly.
So you and many other people around the world, are arguing that these things it's just not right what's going on, that it's a whole thing is just poor science.
Well, not just that, but, I never used to be a conspiracy theorist, but now I believe there's a hidden agenda.
There has to be, right?
Yes.
There has to be. How could people without an agenda have their eyes and their ears and their hearts closed for so long?
To science, and then crucify anyone that goes against
exactly.
them. Like
you have to have an agenda, right? Yeah. So when you give a kid a measles or a mumps vaccine, what's going on?
Well, you're not really giving them anything except particles that are dead, that are in a mix of heavy metals, adjuvants, and preservatives. That's it. That's what they're getting.
But they sell moms on the idea they're giving them just a little bit of measles to make their immune system get active so they could protect against the measles.
But that's the hypothesis. And of course, when we look at Dr. Hamer's confirmation with the CAT scan of the brain, if someone has measles, all we have to do is look at the CT for something going on in the sensory cortex part of the brain that has to do with the skin. This is how he fine-tuned everything. And if we see that the person has had the conflict and is in that kind of a resolution, then according to GNM, it has been confirmed that they had a predisposing shock. That this is not something that they caught from someone else.
Could it be that's why many people have conjectured over years that measles and mumps and et cetera are just a detoxification process, normal, natural?
Right.
The kids might go through...
It's a skin reaction to a separation conflict.
Oh, skin reaction to a separation. Kids going to school or something?
Well, yes, or they just resolve something, remember.
Oh, that's right. They're resolving something when it comes out.
So the analogy that I like to use is, let's say a favorite teacher went on pregnancy leave. And then towards the end of the year, the teacher came back. So all the kids that missed the teacher would go into a healing phase. So several kids in a class might develop measles as a result. And they call this an epidemic.
Here's an email. It says, my youngest daughter has been diagnosed by gene testing as having SBG11/ALS/5. So yeah, let's get into this whole gene thing, this 23andMe, and this is it's pretty big. I mean, everybody, not everybody, but many people are getting their stuff testing and then getting all anxious about having different things like SPG11.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Hamer spoke about this very early on in the 1990s, that he found that the genes don't actually alter until you have the biological shock.
Epigenetics.
let's fast forward to epigenetics, which were discovered in 2003.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely correct. They are correct in what they find. But they also admit now, and I've explored this to a great extent, it is also now admitted in epigenetics that the future will tell us that the tool of choice to help people with these so-called epigenetic conditions is psychotherapy of all things.
Yeah. Evolving spiritually, emotionally, and mentally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not just that, but understanding the origin of the conflict.
Yeah.
So they are really confirming Dr. Hamer's findings through a different kind of methodology. We have to have the biological shock in order for any disease process to be set into motion. And this is exactly what they discovered through epigenetic research.
That's what this is. This is what's going on.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
And this is probably going to be perhaps the future of medicine.
Yes, and a great deal of these so-called conditions that infants are born with are as the result of a biological shock that it experienced in utero.
Mm-hmm.
This means that it experienced it via the mother, not the mother's reaction per se, but the infant or the fetus actually had to experience it itself.
Which makes sense. It could be anything, right?
Exactly. This explains all congenital diseases.
Uh-huh. Dad going to war, whatever, car wrecks, divorces.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Things like that.
And the congenital problem is determined by the development of the fetus, or what part of the fetus was developing in that particular part of the gestation process.
In that moment.
For example, if they experienced something in the first trimester, then that fetus would be in a situation of fight or flight where it could spontaneously abort. And this is usually when all miscarriages take place. It's in the first trimester. So the fetus would have experienced something in that trimester in order to abort.
So then when moms and dad gets frightened because they could have another child with this or that, that's just not right.
No, absolutely not.
But the fear of that could create it.
Well,
I don't know.
I'm not convinced of that.
Yeah.
Remember that we need to have that moment in time that we did not expect.
The moment.
The biological shock.
The biological shock.
Yeah.
And Hamer's work and your work, and we can conjecture and see pretty clearly that it happens in the nowness of the moment at that moment. Yeah. And that's in the body at that moment.
Exactly.
It's there.
Yeah.
So that could explain how it can leave the body just as quickly.
Well, you're absolutely right. But of course, depending on the kinds of physical repercussions there were and what part of the brain was affected, remember that if we resolve a certain conflict, we can die in the process of the healing.
Yes. Yeah.
As it could be in a heart infarct.
Yes. And then even if we solve something on the spiritual level where there's no time, maybe there's time and space as it takes to come around down here.
Mm-hmm.
So to speak.
But you know what I've noticed in my work, especially with people that have chronic ailments, that if we find the conflict that is associated with it, and I'm talking about the original conflict, their symptoms can leave immediately, even though they might be in an inflammatory process.
Which could explain instantaneous healings that people have reported over the years, and even,
Absolutely.
Yeah, even healers like Jesus and where they help people get to a spiritual level and poof, it's gone.
It's that deeper understanding that releases us. And I think this is the key. And this is a word that Dr. Harmer uses when he's talking about finding the conflict. He says this is the release of the conflict. So we are, in fact, releasing it into the ether, if you will. So this is when, on, I believe, the quantum level, that the healing really will begin to take place.
When folks see this original conflict somehow in a dream, or they think about it, or they go through therapy, or whatever they do, spiritual exercises, do they have to be in a state of awareness where they realize that they can now let this go and not think it's still there?
I think that's the key.
Do you?
Yes. It's the awareness and how it is connected to what it is that you're suffering from. That's the most effective way to deal with it.
The awareness. I would say, oh, that works like that, and that happened, and that's interesting, and okay.
And this is when the healing process is really sped up, if they are in a healing phase.
Mm-hmm. Let's take this phone call. Good morning. Who's this? You're on the telephone, or are you on the radio, rather, with Isadora Laker. Good morning.
Well, this is Sean and Sharon up in Seattle. Enjoying our beautiful sunshine rain here.
What can we help you with, Sean?
Well, I'm absolutely fascinated and 100% in agreement with what she's talking about here. I wanted to know, is Dr. Alan Phillips down in New Zealand part of the same findings, or is NIS different than what you are talking about there?
I have no idea who he is.
Okay. Neurological integrative systems is basically, I don't know.
Okay, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter at this point. Okay, she doesn't know. Yeah.
And so, on to, which is, I don't know, I always call it voodoo, muscle testing and whatnot. Is that any part of anything that you deal with, is muscle testing, which is,
not at all. No. We are very precise in the way we work with patients, in the sense that Dr. Harmer discovered very effectively the exact nature of the conflict that is responsible for the disease process. As a result, he has developed the scientific chart, which would tell us what the conflict is responsible for the disease, how it will materialize during the conflict active phase, and how it will behave when the conflict is resolved. And of course, knowing all of this, we also know the nature of the conflict and the kind of conflict that is responsible for the onset of any of these processes. So our line of questioning is very directed in that sense. So, for example, let's look at today's flu symptoms. When we're dealing one-on-one with the individual, my line of questioning would be, okay, what did you come to terms with, or what did you resolve 48 hours before you had your first symptoms? And then, of course, we have to describe the conflict. We're looking at a fear of some sort, but what was the fear all about? And then when we understand all of that, we can very effectively home in on the moment in time that this biological conflict was initiated. But this doesn't just apply to flu symptoms. This applies to everything. Okay, there is a time frame where we know it will take, for example, in the case of a breast cancer, we always look 6 weeks prior to when they first notice the lump, because it will take approximately that length of time for something to materialize on the physical level.
6 weeks on the breast cancer generally.
In most cases, yes. If a woman regularly does a self-examination.
And so one of the hardest questions that I always get when I'm helping people out is, okay, well, what about the adopted person where they don't know their parents, they don't know anything, and they're just, they were born and they've had trauma, sickness, and everything. I'm like, well, hey, that one's above my pay grade. If we don't know your past and you were just born and the kid's sick, we don't know where you came from. Do you have viable ways to detect with them?
Well, since most of our biological conflicts are from the time that we are born, it's relatively difficult to ascertain. If we adopted a child from day one, then of course we have more insight as to what the child may have experienced in our family, so to speak. Remember, it's not the origin that is as important as it is the immediate experience of the individual and what they experienced in their lifespan. It's difficult to ascertain from the epigenetic viewpoint, but if we have a family history, it's a little bit easier to understand how this came about in the individual and what the weaknesses were in the family regarding the experience. This all boils down to programming. But I have to say, when I'm dealing with adopted individuals, we deal with their specific experience. We have no knowledge of the adopted families.
Just their experience, yeah.
But that's where Dr. Hamer's work began. It's only been since 2003 that since epigenetics came into being, that we have a greater insight into their predispositions.
Mm-hmm.
But the experience must be in the individual in order for a disease process to materialize.
Thanks for the call, Sean. Good questions, Ilzadora Laker. We'll stick around for a few more moments to take a few emails. Can Ilzadora please explain how a male experiencing chronic inflammation and ulcer-type burning in the upper GI tract can help the body to resolve the source conflict, such that the pain is completely healed? So he's asking a kind of basic question, right?
Right.
Which you've been talking about.
Well, this is a condition, I believe, that is called GERD or GERD,
right.
gastroesophageal reflux disease. And this is caused by a territorial anger. So we're looking at a situation that has made them very angry, where there is hyperacidity in the stomach, that over a long period of time, especially when the individual is lying down, will begin to corrode the lining of the esophagus. And this is usually when they will develop these symptoms. Now, if there is a great deal of a pain in the upper gastric area, that's also a signal that the conflict is highly active.
Still active.
So we have to look at when this pain actually began and what the situation was in their lives. 99% of the time, that original situation was resolved, but it left the individual with tracks. In other words, reminders that are the potential triggers that are going to prolong these symptoms.
So in that case, in the territory thing, would this emailer have to, what if the whole territory thing is gone and he's forgiven the people for doing it and he's forgiven himself or whatever for getting involved in this? Why would it still be there?
Well, because we're talking about our subconscious, which is really our memory bank. And all of our experiences are registered in our memory bank. And it is the memory bank that is really responsible for putting us into high alert when we or when it feels that we are in a situation that is similar or the same as we were in before. So what it actually does is it gives us these physical symptoms to remind us The problem is that it wasn't until Dr. Hamer's work that we really understood what our bodies were saying to us when the subconscious mind went back into high alert.
And then the solution would be, at that point?
Recognition.
Just recognition that that's what went on.
Absolutely. And how the current situation relates to that original situation. That's the trick.
The current situation mean while you're still in the healing mode?
Well, what is giving you your symptoms?
Right.
So let's say someone develops these gastric symptoms when they eat a certain food, right?
Yes.
So, which is something that a lot of people over time will develop. That food is an actual track right back to that situation. In other words, you were either eating it or had just eaten
I see.
at the moment of the shock.
That's great. That's fun. That's interesting. But then once you clear it all up totally, you can probably eat whatever you want, pretty much, as long as it's good quality.
Dr. Hamer said in the beginning, if you are free of any conflicts, you can digest nails.
I love it. Can I use that? Thanks.
Absolutely.
Here's an email. Excellent interview. Your guest is brilliant. More of this, please. At last, a voice of reason. Another one. I've been listening to your show for 7 years now. Your guest, Ilsadora Laker, is my favorite guest you've ever had on. Thank you for the show. From Kate and Lexington. See, you're one of the faves already. Let's see if this is very long, but I want to get this person on there. I want to see if I can condense it just a little bit. Try to keep these babies short. I contracted COVID-19 in Cambridge and dealt with it at my house on advice from my doctor because the hospitals are filled with patients. The idea of using opposites to deal with the medical condition is how I solved the permanent tension throughout my body lasting 3 days, making it so I was unable to move my leg to a 90-degree angle. I simply hydrated constantly, drinking lots of coconut water, taking vitamin C, and after 3 days, my body could move more normally. Also, there was a 3-day of hallucinations, chest issues. I was unable to swallow solid food. I think what is killing people is dealing with it at a restrictive hospital environment where you have to ask permission to hydrate, or if you're able to hydrate when you want to do this thing shouldn't kill you. Wow, do you understand what they're saying here? Wow, that's interesting.
Well, it sounds like they resolved a very huge conflict with such extreme symptoms.
Yeah.
But, to help you along in your healing process, you have to look at what was going on in your life just a few days, a couple of days, in many cases less than 48 hours prior to the onset of your symptoms. That was good. Okay, this is what people have a difficulty with, that 60% of all of our conditions are already healing phases. We have resolved something. We have come to terms with something. So that's what you need to ask yourself. And judging by your symptoms, we are looking at something that you had great difficulty with. If you had such extreme symptoms in your legs, we're looking at feeling trapped. And if you had severe digestive symptoms, this had to do with something that you were unable to come to terms with.
Unable to come to terms with.
Yes.
But you're suggesting that these traumas, if you will, can also be good experiences. Did I hear you say that?
Nobody likes to experience a trauma.
Right. Yeah. Have you had success, writes an emailer, with people recovering from a stroke?
It depends on the area of the brain. Now, even in traditional medicine, they have two kinds of strokes. We have a hot stroke and we have a cold stroke. A cold stroke, according to Dr. Hamer, would be either an epileptic or epileptoid crisis, in other words, a healing crisis, or a conflict active phase, because the symptoms are exactly the same. So let's say, for example, someone developed a paralysis on the left or the right side of the body. if this is a hot stroke, then there would have been a healing phase somewhere in close proximity to that relay in the brain that was impinging on the function with a certain amount of fluid buildup in that or inflammation in that part of the brain. Here we're looking at symptoms that would take perhaps 3 or 4 weeks to abate before mobility came back. Then we have the cold stroke. And here, if it is the conflict active phase, these symptoms are also more transient. They can disappear in a couple of hours. These are what we generally call TIAs. They are a short-term conflict active phase where our function has been impaired. Then we have the kind of stroke, which is another cold stroke that occurs at a healing crisis. And these are the ones that do the permanent damage. These are the ones that we have difficulty in recovering from.
Isadora, I want to read you a couple of headlines that I just pulled up on one of the websites I go to. Pretty reliable kind of place, but these days there's not a lot of really, really alternative stuff out there. Most of them were part, the whole thing. But and then I'd like you to comment on what your opinion would be of how this thing, whatever it is going to last. CNN's Chris Cuomo says that New York City's the mayor of New York City, diagnosed with COVID-19, right, the test. The Empire State Building debuts a dystopian red siren light at the top. You should see that one. This is interesting. China starts publishing data on asymptomatic cases of fears of a second wave grow.
There we go.
There you go. Trump calls for $2 trillion infrastructure in phase 4. So it looks like the politicians are going to be in there getting as much money as they can, from the Federal Reserve Bank, right?
Yes.
This is a dynamic trigger that will trigger the next round of global turmoil. This is at a $2.5 billion credit fund. No, I won't read that one. Let's see if I got another one. There are multiple strains of coronavirus. Here's what we know. Oh, okay. Now we got more strains, right? Wow, amazing. And this is at a pretty conservative, theoretically reputable website. I'm reading this, a financial website. Huh?
Well, do you now understand why Dr. Hamer's work has been suppressed for the last 40 years? It would change everything.
It just blows all this up.
Exactly.
So knowing or believing that the mainstream media, along with the people who, whatever, the globalists, whoever these people are, who knows? We'll talk more about it with a fellow and who are they. This whole thing could be going on for a while.
Well, I think that was the whole point of so much hype and fear. That was or the fear mongering that has been going on since January. I think, in my opinion, they took an opportunity to create something that would destroy the economy for whatever reason they have.
Right.
We're looking at the possible, and this is a reality in Europe. The digitalization of money. In other words, no more cash.
Even more so than today, right?
Then, of course, we have to look at the other agendas from Big Pharma, where there are laws being passed as we speak for, dare I say it, mandatory vaccinations.
Yes.
For example, in Denmark, in the last week, Denmark has declared in this state of emergency that everyone must be vaccinated, and if they refuse, the police will arrest them, and if necessary, if this happens en masse, the military will be called in.
Yes.
So
also,
things setting a precedent.
Yes, exactly. Things are going on in New York where they're actually fining people for getting closer to 6 feet, if you can imagine.
Yes.
pretty Orwellian stuff.
And in the UK, they're encouraging people to rat on their neighbors.
Yes. Yeah.
If they see them going out of the house more than once a day.
Yeah. Headline today, Dr. Fauci, he's the, whoever, this guy, coronavirus could return in the fall. Second wave.
Well, yes, of course. They're adding to the hype, right?
Right.
This is giving them an excuse to remain in a state of emergency and to impose all of these restrictions on people.
We had.
I hate to think what really is the long-term effect of this this lockdown.
Yes, ma'am.
On the world economies.
Yes, ma'am. We had one of the top prognosticators and graphs and looks at cycles in stock markets, Charles Nenner, on yesterday. And he said his charts show that there's going to be another wave in the fall. So Dr. Fauci must have heard that show. Just kidding. Wow. Well, my dear, what do you think? Is there anything we've missed? Probably a lot, but you did a great job here this morning. I appreciate all of your time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just hope people get it.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is, some people say that this is also on the other end of it, a potential of a great spiritual awakening, where a lot of souls are going to wake up and say, what's going on here? This is not right,
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity.
Yeah, opportunity to grow and to change and to change. Ilse-Dora, when is, tell folks before we leave here, thanks for your time, this webinar, do you have a new one starting up?
Well, I hope to start again in the fall, right from the beginning, with expanded courses that are going to lead to certification for official GNM consultants.
But certainly it would be something that somebody could do on their own to really understand and be able to take more responsibility for themselves and their families for the rest of their lives. Right, of course.
That's why I'm going to have courses for different people. We're going to have some courses for the general public, which makes this work very simple to understand.
Yeah.
And it's going to be called GNM for Everyone.
So the main place to go, we'll put this on our show page, gnmonlineseminars.com.
Yes. What I suggest is those of you that are interested, get on our newsletter, and we will send the announcements when everything's ready to go.
And they can do that through your website.
Absolutely.
All right, Miss Ilse-Dora, thanks for a great couple of hours. We appreciate your support and your research. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
See you soon. Ilse-Dora Laker, gnmonlineseminars.com. Please pass on these links to everyone that you care about. If this rang true for you and you had a lot of aha moments, maybe it's a nice wake-up call for you too, to start looking at your body, your mind, and who you are so a little bit differently than before. That's why we're here. All right, kids, we're going to have fun tomorrow. We're going to talk with Tom Luongo, who's a geopolitical, financial guy. I think that you're going to find him quite fascinating. Also, Stephen Guinness, who is going to tell you who they is. They. We call them the boys. We call them Doug and Mel. Who are they? When people say, have you heard what they're doing? Who are they? We're going to talk about that tomorrow. I love you all very much. Thanks for your ongoing support. If there's anything I can do for you, email me, patrick@oneradionetwork.com. patrick@oneradionetwork.com. I love you all very much. Thanks for everything. See you tomorrow, 9 o'clock Central.
Nothing is more expensive than bad information. Know the source. OneRadioNetwork.com.